If I Should Die by Donevy Westphal. Available through Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and other retailers. Michael, show Mr. Armstrong around a bit. We'll finish out here, Mrs. McDonald said. Come on, Mr. Michael stood and slid his chair under the table. Julius followed Michael into the spacious modern kitchen. He gazed in wonder at the dark walnut cabinets and polished gold-flecked granite countertops. Wow. From the dark ceiling beams to the terracotta floor tiles, the cavernous kitchen was saturated in rustic Spanish decor and seemed to contain a double of every appliance. The laundry room is through that door, Michael nodded toward a darkened room to his right. We have the laundry room, mud room to leave our boots and wash our hands at the sink. That door exits to the breezeway, which will take you to your accommodations. From the kitchen, we come into the foyer. Michael motioned for Julius to follow him through the doorway opposite of the one he had just come through. Michael stood back and motioned toward the kitchen. The kitchen, laundry room, this foyer, the living room, and the bedrooms over this part of the house, he pointed upstairs, made up the original 36 by 24-foot farmhouse. When we remodeled, we added the breezeway, garage, and all that is on the south, and everything else to the north of the living room. You put in a lot of work here. Julius stopped to examine the living room. Look at that fireplace. My mother loved a fireplace, and that one is fascinating. Julius stroked his fingers over the large, rough stones of the fireplace. Mom found the design out west. The stones are local. She helped design this? That'd be no small task, especially since she's... Julius sputtered to a stop. She hasn't always been blind, Michael said. She and my sister Laura helped with the work. I see. She maneuvers around so well, I just assumed. Julius fished for the rest of the story. Michael sidestepped so Julius could view the next area, but didn't add to his original comment. The next room we call the book nook. It's the common library. Julius stared. As a child, this would have been heaven on earth. Julius walked into the nook, turned into circles, and imagined lying across the area rug, engrossed in a Hardy Boys, Little Britches, or Dickens novel on a winter eve. It brought back the memories of trying to find time and a secluded spot to read. Sometimes he'd hide in the barn loft where the gray or calico tabby cats would curl up beside him. If all else failed, he could at times find himself a few minutes in the outhouse, but that wasn't a good getaway. Julius looked over the selection of the volumes on the right side shelves and walked by a bay window and comfy window seat to peruse the floor-to-ceiling bookshelves on the other side. The room had the feel of a cozy chamber. Figurines and a few pictures added pleasant dashes of color. A deep red leather love seat, flanked by two mismatched Queen Anne's chairs, bordered by elegant end tables, made the room even more inviting. Off of the book nook, the tower is a separate alcove. It's used for entertaining small groups. Michael motioned at the raised platform with the baby grand piano and a scattering of chairs. This reminds me of an English manor I once visited, Julia said. The next room in there is the office and research room. Michael moved past the door to the next room as he spoke. Julius made a mental note as he followed Michael. Over here, Michael indicated a large pocket door, is the formal dining room and a small bathroom tucked beside the kitchen. And now you're at the back side of the kitchen. They stepped into the kitchen where Ruth and Mrs. McDonald had just finished up cleaning. I've done some photography on Spanish homes. This ranks up there with some real classics. Looks like something out of a magazine, Julia said. Mrs. McDonald shut a cupboard door and leaned against the counter. As a bride, the first home I had was the cabin. In the first married years, we didn't have running water. Our bathroom was a little room about 40 feet out the kitchen door at the end of a long path. Our children were half raised before we had what many people today would call necessities. But in time, things became easier. Not better, but easier. Water in a faucet doesn't make life better, just different. As Charles Spurgeon wrote, happiness does not consist of how much you have, but how much you enjoy. A man's voice rang from the front door. Where is everybody? We're back here, Lewis. Mrs. McDonald led the way toward the front door. Julius thought about how nice it would be to exit to his accommodations as they filed toward the foyer and the front door, but of course that would never do. There was no way to avoid the man he recognized earlier from the cafe. This is my little big brother, Michael referred to the fact that he was the taller of the two. Dad always said the longer we kids came, the taller we got. I may not be the tallest, but I'm still the oldest, wisest, and best looking, Lewis joked. Mrs. McDonald held up a hand. Lewis, this is our new renter, Julius Armstrong. She emphasized the word renter. He'll be renting the gardener's apartment for 3 weeks. Julius, this is my eldest son, Lewis. Glad to meet you, Julius said with a handshake. Didn't I see you this morning at the cafe? Lewis's eyes narrowed. How long will you be here, and what's your business? Not to be nosy, just curious. I'm a freelance writer. The plan is 2 weeks, probably 3 to finishing up. With effort, Julius smiled. He could feel his heart beating erratically. Would he be able to pull this gig off? Would they recognize him? If they ever write a training manual, they should include a how-to-handle section on things like this. I see, Lewis hesitated as if mulling the explanation around. I hope you enjoy your stay. Turning to his mom, he said, That's funny, Mom. Laura's pretty good at making a dime, but she never thought of that source of income. He's got a good point, Mrs. M., Ruth said. And she and Michael laughed as if there was a hilarious joke. Well, anyway, I came over to tell Michael I need him to take the boys out and start moving the fence tomorrow. I have a job putting in irrigation, but I need to move those sows. Julius tucked that conversation with its parent joke into a nook in his mind and then took advantage of the change in subject. Glad to meet you, Lewis, and everyone. He smiled and twisted with a slight bow to his hostess. Thank you for your hospitality, but I've flown halfway around the world today. If you'd given me leave, I think I'll take up my hat and wish you good night. Good night, Mr. Armstrong, Mrs. McDonald said. This way, Ruth led him to the laundry room door. Like Michael said, you go through that door across the breezeway to the stairs. Sleep well. Thank you, and good night. Once upstairs in his room, he unhooked his case from its hiding place under the bed. Setting it up on the small coffee table, he opened and folded the screen into position. He was not unappreciative of its special design and function, a special military prototype, a one-of-a-kind computer built to answer to his touch only. He could boot up briefly to check on the intel Director Meyer was sending. But his battery wouldn't last long, and he was exhausted. Tomorrow he'd hook it up to a stable power source and attach it to a dish. After checking messages, he looked at some of the files and then powered down and got ready for bed. He was so ready for sleep, but 30 minutes later he lay wide awake. Throwing the covers back, he rose and, stepping across to the open window, he dropped into the overstuffed chair. Lewis had left 15 minutes before. Now Julius watched the lights in the central house wink out and heard the chatter of Mrs. McDonald, Michael, and Ruth as they migrated up to bed, leaving the lower house quiet. His brows drew together as he started brooding. The sparse lights of the serene countryside mocked him as they blinked across the darkness. He held his head in his hands and groaned, "Oh, Lord, what am I doing here?" Missions like this don't happen. Assignments don't embed the agent smack in the middle of people who know you intimately. They don't expect you to carry on undercover as if you are strangers for 3 weeks, trying to convince you these are just people. I did read of an agent embedded in familiar territory time and again during World War II in France. He was recognized once. An old acquaintance identified his voice in a phone call. The nerve strain of walking among the criminal elements, the not knowing if this day would be his last, if it all made him old and skeptical. He heaved a deep sigh and massaged his forehead. Outside, frogs sang from a distance, and a solitary light shone upstairs in the house. Notes drifted from a piano and floated across the void. Pachelbel's canon, indeed, had always been one of his favorites. Tension eased from his heart and mind. Tomorrow, he thought. I'll deal with this tomorrow.